As a young boy, Luard was an orphan lost on the streets of an unnamed city in the United Sanctuary. As luck has it, he was found by a knight of Shadow Paladin. By this knight, as a way to pay his debt, Luard learned the art of swordsmanship. But life wasn't as good for this young boy as it seems, as years later, this knight would fall in battle. Traumatized by this event, Luard laid down his sword and started to delve into the studies of the hidden arts. This uncovered his latent talents in magic of Dragshift, which allowed Luard to tap into the power of ancient dragons. Dragheart Luard is the most talented wizard in the Dragshift arts. His powers are well represented in his abilities, as he can utilize the life force of all living beings to achieve his transformation towards a complete dragon. Luard's first ability allows him once per turn to sacrifice 2 Great Ones to draw a card and to retire an opponent's rearguard. This ability allows Luard to get more value out of generic Great Ones, but on top of that, this allows Luard to set up for his next big move, as this is just an opening act for the main spectacle. As Luard's second skill allows him for the cost of 3 counterblast to return 2 normal units from the drop zone back into the deck, and by doing this, he can transform into his Dragshift form, Dragdriver Luard. In this form, he gains access to the ancient powers of dragons of distant past. At the end of the turn, he will revert back to his normal form, but when this happens, he will gain a new force marker, making him stronger and stronger as the game progresses. An important aspect about the timing of the skill is that if you're out of Dragdriver targets, you can send a copy back into the deck and still be able to superior ride that specific Dragdriver. Luard in his human form is merely a vessel for his Dragshift forms, so to truly understand Luard's unmatched power, we need to look at his Dragdriver Transformation, as well as the many different supporting wizards and creatures to get a glimpse at its true potential. Dragdriver Luard is a massive Vanguard unit, as it not only allows us to superior call a board of Great Ones, but it can give those units an extra critical, while he himself can become a massive beater. His ability to superior call multiple Great Ones at the same time allows us to do all kinds of crazy things. Every Great One interaction this deck can do will come back to Dragdriver, as his field call will enable a lot of different combos, and to top it all off, he has a force marker, allowing us to generate 3 force markers in a single turn for maximum value. A core card for Luard's unstoppable power is Drag Wizard Morfessa. This grade 2 is seen as a grade 1 on the field and in deck. This allows it to occupy the same toolbox as every other grade 1, granting us access to this card at all times. But the reason this is so powerful is because she enables us to achieve multi-attacks, as she replaces herself with a grade 1 mid-battle, allowing us to gain more value of the turbo force marker acceleration we do thanks to Luard. But while she on paper can only achieve 4 multi-attacks, she can in fact achieve 5 multi-attacks with the right setup. But more on that later. Now that we've seen the higher grade core cards, let's look at the new grade 1 cards which are part of the Luard toolbox. Abyssal Owl is the trusted companion of Luard, and he is our best draw engine in the deck. In most cases, we can decide which resource we want to spend to get the draw, which is a very powerful skill to have in a deck with its many resource enablers. Knight of Strict Order Suels is a massive beat stick which allows us to achieve high numbers on both columns, regardless where we might put our force 1 markers. This combined with Morfessa can give us 4 to 5 attacks that are easily above 30k thresholds without any problem. Hardship Sage Decron gives us more value on the opposite side of the spectrum, as it gives us more shield value, which can help us stall for a turn or two to accumulate more power before we dive into our finishers. For the final new additions, we look at Luard's assistance, as Morfessa isn't the only drag wizard that supports Luard. Drag Wizard Leophil gives us access to any grade 1 in the deck. This might sound underwhelming in comparison to Dragdriver, but this card in fact is very powerful. It allows us to flood the board in the early game, and it can help us to set up the field and drop zone with enough grade 1s for Dragheart Luard's skill. So this is a nice early aggressive tool, but also a setup card. But that is the service of what this card provides us, as this card allows us to do so much more depending on which tactic we play and which grade 1s we run. But more on that in the specific deck list themselves. The final card I want to highlight is Dragwizard Nice. This is an extra consistency card that helps us attain either Dragheart Luard or Dragwizard Leophil, which both are incredibly powerful cards. On top of that, this card also substitutes as a nice retire skill if we need to remove more cards from our opponent's side of the field. Now on first glance, only looking at these cards, you might think the resources are quite tight in Luard, as seen as Luard uses Counterblast and potentially 3, then Dragdriver uses a Counterblast, Morfessa uses 1, also Leophil uses 1, and then Nice uses Soul and Abyssal Owl uses 1 or the other, and as seen as we want Luard in the Soul for Dragdriver, means we can just Soul Blast our cards. This sounds a nightmare in terms of our resource management, but in actuality, Luard has the best resource engine of all the clans and can easily operate on 1 Counterblast a turn. If we only address these cards, then we can move Dragheart out of the equation, as it's very easy to drop his cost down to 1 Counterblast or even 0 Counterblast for the game. Nice is also a card we hardly use, so we only need to worry about Dragdriver, Morfessa, Leophil and Abyssal Owl. For those 4, we only are using 2 on a regular basis, as Leophil and Abyssal Owl are cards we only use when we have to or when we have the resources to spare. And even then, this whole problem is fixed thanks to Dragdriver. Shadow Paladin has many great ones that give us resources from Counterblast to Soul Blast, as we have cards like Dark Sage Charon, Nightmare Painter and Knight of Accomplishment Dila Eld. So on the back of using Dragdriver, we can in fact create resources while gaining advantage, which is crazy to think about. The same is as with Leophil. If we combine him with a Charon, we don't really use a Counterblast but a Soul Blast, which at the same time can set up for our Luard, as we can Soul Blast a grade 1. So suddenly we see that resources are not as restricted as it once was. Now as for the trigger lineup, your safe bet is to go for the standard 8-4-4 split, as seen as you will have big numbers as well as solid draw engine on top of that. You could also increase the crit count a bit if you have faith that you will draw into your Dragheart Luard on a consistent basis, but you could also flip this around by running a bit more draws to get your Luard, as seen as you probably swing with double criticals anyways, so the crit aspect of the trigger means not as much as the potential draw factor, as that also increases the chance of you finding multiple Luards, so you can generate even more force markers each and every single turn. Now with that statement, you know which marker is played in Luard. This deck is 100% played with Force 1. Not only will you create a crap ton of force markers in a couple of turns, your units will gain a natural double critical, making Force 2 effectively useless after the first grade 3 turn. So with the basics covered, let's dive into the different builds which we can create for Luard, and we'll begin with a good basic template variant. So as we can see, the whole basic core cards that we previously discussed is here. We have both Luards as well as Leophil, Morfessa and Nice and the other grade 1s. Now we do have some new additions in the grade 1 lineup. We have Cherishing Knight Brenwyn. This is the generic grade 3 searcher, which allows us together with Nice to get to Dragheart Luard on a much more consistent basis. Its discard effect can also be used to set up the drop zone with multiple grade 1s for Luard and Morfessa. Another new grade 1 is Black Sage Charon. This is a generic countercharger that allows us to refund the cost of Dragdriver and Leophil on the back end of resolving their skills. This card is the reason why we can utilize all our skills while having only access to 1 Counterblast. The final new grade 1 is Nightmare Painter. Where Charon was the grade 1 that gives us Counterblast, this is the grade 1 that gives us Soul. This allows us to view cards like Nice and Abyssal Owl. The tactic for this Luard is as basic as it gets. You want to set up your drop zone with 3 grade 1s before you go into Dragheart Luard. To do this, you can either guard with them in the early game or use Luard's first ability to send 2 grade 1s from the field to the drop zone. Another great way to set up your field and drop zone is by using a Dragwizard Leophil to superior call a Black Sage Charon. Then you can refund the Counterblast and Soul Blast your grade 1 right target. Not only do you add 1 grade 1 to the drop zone, you also get a grade 1 on the field, which can be used as a cost for Luard's retire skill. And even if we only have 1 Counterblast, we can get it back with Charon, which we then can immediately spend for Dragdriver. And we can also superior call the Charon off of Morfessa to even refund her cost. So as you can see, you can keep the ball rolling with only 1 Counterblast. Another thing you want to do in the early game is to draw into multiple Dragheart Luards. This can be done with our 2 searchers, but we can also utilize Abyssal Owl to potentially hard draw into a Luard or one of our grade 3 searchers. Your main aggressive play is to utilize Morfessa to achieve 4 powerful attacks, and to increase the overall output you want to get as much Shuels on the board to reach massive numbers. You can spread out your force markers to both side columns, but as seen as Morfessa allows you to attack twice in one column, you might want to stack them all in one column to have two massive attacks that potentially both swing with 2 criticals. Now as for the rest of the game plan, you want to go into a Dragdriver every single turn, and as for what you send back to the deck and what you superior call with Luard depends completely on your scenario. Do you need some resources? Then superior call either a Charon or a Nightmare Painter. Do you need more shield? Get Dekron or Abyssal Owl. Do you want to retire something? Get Nice. But do you want to go for a kill turn or a hard push? Then go for Morfessa and Knight of Strict Order Suels. Now that we've seen the basics in action, let's add one single card to the mix to completely change our winning image. So we've seen some changes in the card distribution, but the biggest change is the inclusion of Abyss Router. This on first glance looks like a worse Abyssal Owl, as we can only draw a card if we call a trigger to the field. So why do we play this card? This card allows us to change the 4 attack Morfessa combo into a 5 attack Morfessa combo. How this works is really simple. We attack with both front row units, and once we attack with the Morfessa, we superior call a Abyss Router from the drop zone, and because Abyss Router is an on-place effect, we can resolve it, and we then superior call a Grade 0 from our hand to the other column. This will result in 2 more standing front row units. Because of this combo, we more likely want to distribute our force markers to both front row circles, unlike the one with the normal 4 attack pattern. In order to fulfill this combo, you need to have an Abyss Router in the drop zone, have the necessary soul for the cost, as well as having a Grade 0 in your hand to superior call to the field. There's one thing to keep in mind with this combo, and that's the fact that your triggers will not gain the additional critical, and cards like Suels won't activate anymore as you miss a Grade 1 in the field. Now there is a different version of this 5 attack pattern which uses a different Grade 1 which requires a bit more setup, but unlike Abyss Router, does this with Grade 1s instead of Grade 0s, so cards like Luard and Suels will still benefit. That Grade 1 card is Apocalypse Bat. This card allows us to superior call a copy of himself to the field from the soul. So where we need to pay a Soul Blast and have a Grade 0 in our hand for Abyss Router, this card needs a specific card in the soul. So in order to achieve this, we run of course Nightmare Painter. The idea is that you send 2 Apocalypse Bat to the drop zone, then use a Nightmare Painter to send one of them into the soul. And then once you attack with Morfessa, you recall the other bat while we immediately superior call the bat from the soul, which enables us to achieve 5 attacks which all hit with potential double critical. So where this requires a bit more setup, it does allow us to get way more value, as not only will every attack swing for 2 damage, if you have Suels on the field, then you will create much higher numbers as you would otherwise. But even then, the setup is pretty easy to do, as you can get a bat onto the field with Leofal and get him into the drop zone with either Luard himself or just call over him with the Grade 1s from Dragdriver, which could be a Nightmare Painter that can send him straight into the soul afterwards. Now for the final list, we dive into the brand new Superior Ride engine that was provided by the Blaster archetype. But as we all know, if it's generic enough, other decks can and will abuse it. Now as a heads up, because the main is banned with Dragheart Luard, this Superior Ride version has become a lot less consistent. However, if you want to go for a more high roll gimmick deck, then you can go for this style of a deck. Now even though the main bulk of the cards is the same, we see 3 new cards which gives the deck a whole new dimension. First off, we see Phantom Blaster Dragon as a one-off. You don't need to read the skills, as he's mainly here as a 13k vanilla unit that enables us to do the Superior Ride. The second new addition is Blaster Dark. Again, this is mainly a vanilla unit, as its retire skill isn't great anymore, and he's mainly here to enable the Superior Ride. That said, in case that the Superior Ride misses, there is still use for him as a Vanguard unit, as his Twin Drive can help us get to our Luard, and his discard cost can help us set up the drop zone for Luard. But as a rearguard, he is pretty useless on his own. Now for the unit that really matters, we have Freezing Witch Bende. This is the reason we play Blaster Dark and Phantom Blaster Dragon. If we ride Blaster Dark and we have a Bende, we can use her to immediately ride into a Phantom Blaster Dragon. This not only allows us to sit on a 13k unit with Twin Drive, it gives us a early force marker, and it allows us to set up the drop zone with multiple Grade 1s for Luard, while our opponent is potentially still on Grade 1. But there's more. Because we sit on the Grade 3 a turn earlier, this means next turn when we would go into our Luard normally, we will have 3 force markers instead of the usual 2, but the biggest impact is that we immediately get access to the natural double critical of all our Grade 1s, as we have 2 Grade 3s in our soul. And if you went first, This all happens while our opponent is still at grade 2. Now this deck steamrolls when it gets this superior right, but when it doesn't, it's far weaker than your typical Luard deck as it runs multiple dead cards and a more limited toolbox as we have to make room for more non-grade 1 cards. Although we talked about many different cards, tactics and builds, there is so much more to explore. A couple of cards you could experiment with is Cool Bow. This grade 1 could help us gain even more value off of Luard, as you can use him to get a Suels and Abyssal Owl from the drop zone into your hand, and you can immediately retire the 2 rested units with Luard to get more value out of those particular cards. Another really powerful card is Danger Lunge Dragon. This card was originally a finisher for the Mordred Phantom build, but as soon as Luard can create force markers as fast as Mordred can, and it can easily get Great Freeze into the soul, you can easily utilize this card as an additional finisher on top of your multi-attack shenanigans. Luard is an incredibly powerful deck thanks to its toolbox capabilities, its turbo marker generation, control options and multi-attack skills. And in this video we covered most of the basics you should know. But there is so much more to uncover as Luard provides us with endless possibilities, and with new support will only increase the options even further. So now is the time to pick up your studies as a drag wizard. Use this video as a starting point to develop and build your own personal Vanguard deck, as there are many different strategies and many different options, and what we discussed in today's spotlights were just the bare bone basics to have an understanding what this new boss unit can bring to the table for its clan. If you're interested in more content like this deck spotlight, then check out this playlist here where we go over the many different VRs and their respective builds all over the spectrum of Vanguard, which also contains the other builds for VBT10, Phantom Dragon, Aeon. This video has been brought to you by our lovely patrons over at patreon.com/Vanguard Insider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can go to patreon.com/Vanguard Insider and become a patron today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one!